Michelle Williams. She is the executive director for the Dallas Entrepreneur Center at Redbird. With over 14 years of thought leadership experience, Michelle Williams is a social impact and innovation strategist, empowering corporations and nonprofit organizations to better define, execute, and implement their impact. Michelle has had the distinct honor of working with the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Michelle is currently pursuing an executive MBA from the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University, where in 2020 she was appointed to the school's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so we want to go ahead and get started with the conversation. I'll start with Congressman Mark Vesey. Why is this upcoming election so important to get people registered to vote and then get them going to the polls?
Jazzy, yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you putting this forum together with this esteemed group of panelists. This election is important for a lot of different reasons, and particularly as it relates to voting. You know that obviously there have been a lot of policies that have taken place and have been changed in the executive branch of our U.S. government that Donald Trump have not been good for our community. And so we want to make sure that we go and make our voices heard on that. I know that this is a radio station and you have to be non-political or what have you, but I'm urging people to really pay close attention to everything that the president said. I think many of the things he said have been really bad for our community, which is I think that we need to go out and vote. The other thing is I know that the Supreme Court is not necessarily the same thing, but when you look at voting rights in this country and the erosion of voting rights in this country over the last 20 years, and many of these cases, also from the Supreme Court, have been decided 5-4 decision. And if the current president were to be able to justice, like for instance, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said that she is now
Congressman Mark Vesey, your Wi-Fi is kind of distorted, and so it's kind of hard for us to hear what you're saying.
Is it okay? Why don't you come back to me?
Yes, I'll come back to you, and we'll go to Pastor Haynes, if you don't mind. Why is the upcoming election so important to get people registered to vote and then getting them to go to the polls?
Yeah, and thank you so much for this question, because a lot of times we go to the polls or we don't go to the polls because we are caught up in a personality. Elections are about direction. And so what we should be concerned about as it relates to voting in this election is the direction of the country. It has often been said, and it is profoundly true, elections have consequences. I'll see if I can make that as plain as possible. Elections have consequences. 11/9/16, we awaken to the news that Donald Trump had been elected the president of the United States. And so 11/9, I maintain, has become our moral and spiritual 9/11, because we are living today with the consequences of that election. In 2018, in Texas, we elected as the governor of the state of Texas, the current occupant there in the governor's house in Austin. And as we look at how leadership matters, has handled the crises we find ourselves in, we have almost 150,000 Americans who have died during the COVID-19 crisis. 150,000 have died because of who is presiding over this particular crisis, because there is, to this day, no coordinated response, national response to this pandemic. As of right now, there is no coordinated response between the 50 states. There is no coordinated leadership that comes from the White House, because again, we're living with the consequences of 11/9 2016. Elections have consequences, and I could go on, but I'll simply say right here, don't just stop with COVID-19, but look at the response to what I call COVID-16-19. 401 years Black people have been in this country. Check out the response at the top to what has been the George Floyd pandemic, as it were. George Floyd, which is a reminder of racial injustice, police misconduct and brutality. Look at the responses we've gotten from the federal level and from the state. Those are the consequences of 2016 and even 2018. And so the bottom line is elections have consequences. And the most important thing for us to remember is that elections are about a country's direction. You literally, when you go to the poll in November, or if you go in October, early voting, here's the good news. You have an opportunity to determine the direction of this country. If you get with your homies, you get through and say, I'm going to educate myself about the issues because this is the direction I want the country to go in. And if you mobilize your posse, mobilize your crew, the good news is you can literally set the stage for what direction this country is going to go into. You see where we are right now. Jazzy is so on point. This is the most important election in our lifetime because we are witnessing the unraveling of democracy. And the question is, are we going to go about a new direction, or are we going to continue in the direction that we are going in right now? One more time, elections have consequences. One more time, elections are about direction. You have the power. Yes, you do. You have the power to determine the direction of this country. And God knows we need a new direction.
Yes, you know what? We sure do need a different direction. And that's why you have a hip hop station doing a virtual town hall about getting young people energized, educated into the whole voting process, because we can't sit on the sidelines, not this time. You know, I have so many friends who say, oh, I didn't get a chance to vote. Well, I voted when Obama was running. No, 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 no. You need to vote every single election. And this one coming up is the most important one. I feel that we need to energize our community so we can get our voices heard. Let's go ahead and bring Councilman Casey Thomas into the conversation. And because he has a voting coalition that he's doing, you're part of a lot of events that you have. And how do you feel about getting young people energized about this upcoming election, because it is so important?
Well, Jazzy, thank you for having me a part of this presentation. I will never forgive you for having me to come after one of my most esteemed constituents, Pastor Freddie Haynes. He is an extremely hard act to follow. But this election, as he said, you know, is oftentimes the most important one of our lives. Our lives truly depend on the outcome of this election. It was extremely important that in preparation for the November election, we used July as a test. So what we did is we formed a coalition of community-based organizations, neighborhood organizations, simply to make sure people in July got out and voted. A lot of people were concerned because of the impact of COVID-19 about what would happen if they went to vote in person. So we wanted to make sure people knew how to vote by mail. They also had an opportunity to know all of the safety guidelines that were put in place. I want to commend Tony Pippenspool, who's our election administrator, for running a near flawless election, for making sure that there was PPE, making sure that all the guidelines of CDC were followed when people went in person and voted. I didn't hear one complaint during early voting, and the only complaint I heard during the election day was the fact that in some of the schools, the air conditioning unit was out, and that was outside of her control. And so in July, we had record numbers. We had a larger voter turnout in Dallas County in July than we had in 2016 primary or 2018 primary. That just showed that people not only marched and demonstrated in the streets, they marched and demonstrated with their voice at the polls. And we have to keep it up. It was a good start. We want to keep the momentum going. Our coalition is already starting right now to work on our plans for November. We have a voter registration coordinator. We have a voter education coordinator. And we also have a logistics coordinator because we want to be prepared now for November. And so anyone who's listening, if you're on Facebook, join our coalition. Our vote is our voice. Can you hear us now? We want to make sure people hear us loud and clear with our vote.
Absolutely agree with you 100%. And I was very happy that so many people went out during this last election and voted. A lot of people that I talked to that normally don't vote, they got out and vote, and they were surprised that it wasn't a lot of people on the ballot. And so I had to explain to them that this was a runoff election because they didn't even vote in the election prior to that. So it's so, I don't want to say sad, but it is because so many people just don't know how important these elections are to us, especially when they have a loved one who is touched by the criminal justice system, is what I'm going to say, right? And then they get in front of a judge who could care less about you going to jail during a coronavirus pandemic, who could care absolutely less because of the color of your skin. Let's just be honest here, right? And that's the same judge who nobody went out and voted and they kept their seat. So I see a story about a young woman who is in juvenile because she didn't do her homework. Really? Because she didn't do her homework, she violated probation, and now she's in prison for 3 months. So this is something, because Dylan Roof killed people, he out, right? So this is something that we have to do as far as educating ourselves, so we have more people who go and vote, and we get rid of these judges who do not need to be there, besides the presidential election as well. Congressman Marvisi, let me go ahead and bring you into this because you have started the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus.
Yes.
So I know that you are busy implementing laws to help people in voting. And we hear the president talking about absentee voting and how that's fraud, or even though he does it. Can you tell us a little bit more about absentee voting, and is it fraud if people vote via mail?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can. Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Well, no, absolutely, Jazzy. I appreciate you asking me about my role as chairman of the Voting Rights Caucus here in Congress. And I can tell you a lot about absentee voting. Of course, in Texas, you need to be 65 or older or disabled to vote, or you need to prove that you're not going to be in the county in which you reside and are registered to vote. And then you need to apply for the ballot from out of town, and you need to mail the ballot back from someplace outside of the county. Now, and so our college students need to remember that, first of all. We have college students that are at University of Texas, Prairie View, Texas Southern, and if they are going to be away this November, which may or may not happen because of COVID-19, they need to know that they do have that option. Under COVID-19, what we would like to do to make it easier for people to vote and be safe at the same time, because we know while there are some people that aren't taking this pandemic seriously, that there are others that we are trying to wear masks. We're trying to socially distance. We are trying to make all the sacrifices needed so we can get our economy up and going again, and we get this pandemic under control. And for those of us that would like to be responsible and also maintain the health of ourselves and our families, we should be able to vote by mail regardless of whether or not we're 65 or older, or disabled, or traveling. And we feel that that's the right thing to do, and we will continue to push and march for that because people should need to be able to vote by mail. Look, we haven't experienced COVID-19 in allergy and flu season yet. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen this fall and this winter when people are coughing more, when people are sneezing more, when people are getting colds that are generally pretty contagious themselves. And if people would like to take that extra round of precaution for themselves, they need to be able to do that. So we're going to, again, continue to push for that because everybody that wants to vote in this election needs to be able to. We have way too much on the line. Dr. Haynes was just talking about George Floyd. You know, we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the United States Congress. And look, we already know that Mitch McConnell is not going to move that bill, which is a groundbreaking bill when it relates to policing in this country. We know he's not going to move the bill, but it needs to be our number one priority when Donald Trump is no longer president in 2021. And in order to do that, we have to have majorities in the Senate. And we need to, first of all, get him out of office to be able to do that so we can get it passed. And it's just legislation like that is critical on why we need everyone that wants to be able to cast the ballot to do so this fall. And that should include voting by mail.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Michelle, let's go ahead and bring you into the conversation. How do you feel about absentee voting?
So I think it's imperative because what we're seeing right now is not only are people not able to get always to the polls, right? There's this condition of privilege that we don't think about. So people that don't have access to transportation, people that don't have access or that are the primary caretakers for children or for the elderly or even the elderly that don't meet the specific qualifications that Congressman VC spoke about earlier. We assume that there's this access that we know that everyone doesn't have. And so in order to make sure that there's equity in voting, we have to make sure that we're increasing access and not decreasing access for those who just simply can't get to the polls. And I think the other thing that we need to be mindful of is that there are people with pre-existing health conditions. There are people that are, again, elderly, and even just the general public, right, who may not feel comfortable going directly into the polls and who may simply decide to stay home. And so I think that we need to be mindful of thinking through ways that we can increase access to voting as opposed to trying to be so stringent and allowing essentially additional voter suppression to happen, especially in the midst of a pandemic.
During this time, if you would like to ask a question to our panelists, you can. I noticed that there's a question here from Asia P. Randolph, which is, why is it so difficult to request an absentee ballot? If you want to vote and be safe, I think it's important. If someone from the panel, we can start with Pastor Haynes.
I can answer that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Congressman Mark Vesey, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the reason why it's so difficult to request a ballot under the circumstances that we're dealing with now is because the Republicans want to try to suppress the vote. That's what they've been doing now for the last, 15 or 20 years. I mean, I don't think that people realize, because a lot of times, history is not something that people really like to look at and study. But if you think about when the Voting Rights Act was passed back in the 1960s, and you look at the retrogression to voting rights in the state of Texas and other southern states, and even states outside of the South, like Wisconsin, at no other time in our history have we had this much retrogression since the Voting Rights Act was passed. And the Republicans feel that if you were to expand the right to vote by mail under this pandemic, this national emergency that we're dealing with, that it would jeopardize them losing local and national elections. And so that's why they don't want to expand this right. It's that plain and simple. And we need to be prepared and fight now, but we need to also be looking at what they're going to do in the future. When I was in the state legislature, they had come up with all sorts of legislation on different tactics and things that they could do to suppress the right to vote. And of course, they were hiding under the guise of, no, we're doing this to protect the ballot, to protect everyone's right to vote, because we don't want cheating to occur. But it was clear that they were trying to intimidate Black and Latino voters and make it harder for us to exercise our right to vote, which is what they're doing now. And so that's why it's so difficult at this very moment. Asa, thank you for that question.
Yeah. And Jazz, can I just add this?
Yes.
Because the congressman, I love the fact that he alluded to what went down in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, during their primary, because there was such a determination to suppress the vote, they literally allowed people to get sick in the name of democracy who were determined to exercise their right to vote. Because unfortunately, you have people in office, and I owe this wonderful term to the great Brittany Cooper, author of Eloquent Rage, who engage in what she calls necropolitics. That's the politics of death. And when you engage in necropolitics, it means that you really are oblivious and do not care about the deaths of other people. And so that's what we have going on in this country. That's why there has been such an inept response to the COVID-19 crisis. That is why people callously allowed Wisconsin voters to vote in the midst of this pandemic. And that is why, thank you, Congressman Mark Vesey, there are those right now who really don't want people to have the opportunity to mail in their ballot. You've said it so well. That's what Donald Trump does. So it ain't good enough for us, though it's good enough for Trump. That lets you know that there are those in this country who are more, here it is, concerned about power than they are about patriotism, because all they care about is being in power, even if they have to render us powerless. That is what you are doing, Jazzy, is so important. Thank you, 97.9, because you were saying, I love it. T.I. says this. He says, your vote is your mic. So guess what they're doing, 97.9 community? They're trying to take your mic from you because they don't want you to rock the mic.
All right, Pastor Haynes. We want to show you guys this video. This was taken back in, I want to say March, and NBC covered it, which was some voter suppression that happened in Houston. So for those who are looking and they're like, what is voter suppression? I don't get it. I don't understand. Well, this is exactly what it is. Just a moment. Can you guys see the video?
No, I can't
You
hear
can see
it.
the video, can't hear it.
Okay. Give me just a moment. We're going to try to, okay, if you guys can't hear it, this is pretty much an African-American man who was down in Houston, and he waited hours to vote. And he pretty much said that they only had 2 people working the polls, 2 people. They had a lot of machines available, but only 10 machines were available for Democratic voters and 10 other ones for Republican voters in a, I want to say, mainly Democratic area. And so he asked him, why did you stay out there? And he said, well, because I felt like they wanted to take my vote away. So we can go ahead and take the video down. Okay. We had a couple technical difficulties. Apologize for that. I see we cannot hear the, okay. Yeah, so he pretty much said they wanted to take the vote away. The people were nice. They were feeding them, drinking them water, giving them pizza, you know, trying to get them to stay outside. But at the end of the day, it took these people 5 and 6 hours to vote. And this is something that you never see in areas that are not brown, that have, you know, you never see that where you can find a Whole Foods, is what I'm going to say. So for people who are planning to go vote in November, be mindful that this might happen, right? Be mindful because they want you to stand outside during the pandemic and they want to make it difficult. But I want to make sure that you guys stay energized and you stay in line so you do not fall for it, for the voter suppression that they're trying to do. Councilman Casey Thomas, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think, as you know, people gonna try every trick that you can ever think of this November. I mean, we're even hearing potentially militia groups that are going to be outside of black polling sites to try and intimidate people. I want to commend J.L. Turner Legal Association. That's a Black Lawyers Association here in Dallas. They have already committed. They're part of the coalition. They've already committed to be out at the polls, making sure if we have any issues that they're on site, they're available to respond and report anything. We'll have to be geared up. We're going to have to make sure we have every form of coalition, lawyers in law school. We need community members. We need, we need to make sure everybody is ready to rock and roll when early voting starts, not just election day, but the minute early voting starts, we need to have our team ready to rock and roll, on site, available. We need to have a local number. It's good to have 800 numbers, but we need a local number. And we need to make sure, Jazz, we get into we get to every form of local radio, local press that we can, and make sure people know if you have any issues, you can call this number. Someone will be available from the time the polls open to the time the polls close to respond. Those are the type of actions on the local level we've got to make sure we have in place. Grassroots still works, and we've got to make sure that we have all hands on deck for this upcoming election in November.
I agree.
Can I add something as well, Jazzy? I was just going to say that I think we also need to be mindful that a lot of our poll workers are older. And so a lot of them are choosing not to work in this upcoming election because they understand that their health may be at risk. And so it's imperative for us, those of us that, consider ourselves to be healthy and consider ourselves to be young, to be able to be willing to volunteer to work these polls. Because if what happens in November is if we see that a lot of our uncles and aunties and grandparents simply don't want to risk their health because they're going to be having hundreds of people in front of them every day, then we need to be mindful and we need to be willing to grab that baton and go work these polls so that we don't see that used as an excuse of, oh, well, there just wasn't enough poll workers in this area. If you think about when you go and vote, at least I know for me, I live in Oak Cliff. When I go and vote, it's Medea at the polls. You know what I'm saying? Like it is our elderly constituents that are working these polls. And so I think that's also to council members Thomas's point, we need all hands on deck. And that includes being willing to volunteer.
Absolutely.
And Jazzy, can I say this real quick?
Absolutely.
So and I want to talk about the Texas Secretary of State's office. Now, if Secretary of State, if that position sounds familiar to you, that is because that's the same office in Georgia that robbed Stacey Abrams of her seat in the U.S. Senate back in 2018. And the Texas Secretary of State does not give counties enough money to be able to implement some of these new changes. And we've had several new changes in election law in Texas that have taken place in the last couple of years. The first one is that you can no longer vote a straight ticket ballot anymore. And so when people go to vote in 2020 election, and we need for the people to go vote for who's going to be judge and who's going to be, district attorney and various other seats around the state. But people are going to not know this because the Secretary of State's office did not give counties and local governments enough money to be able to educate voters of these changes. Something else that took place in Harris County that a lot of people probably didn't know because, again, they didn't have enough money because they have a good judge in Harris County. My good friend Rodney Ellis is on the county commissioner's court in Harris County. They have a good county commissioner's court there. But what happened was that people didn't know that on election day that they could vote wherever they wanted to. They were used to going to one particular place to vote. And now you used to only be able to do that during early vote, right? Now you can go and do that wherever you want to. But because the state did not allot enough money to be able to implement these changes correctly, the result is long lines, which is a form of voter suppression. Something else that we need to be concerned about. The state of California spent over $100 million to educate their voters and not their voters, but the citizens of that state that they need to fill their census out and return it. The state legislature in Texas under Greg Abbott, you know how much money they spent to educate voters about the census? they gave local government $0 to educate. California spent $100. We're the second largest state, and we have 3 new, maybe even 4 new congressional seats that we could gain because of all the growth that we've experienced. A third of that growth here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we spent $0 to educate people on the census. They're hoping that we don't return our forms, and so we need to do everything that we can for these next 100 days to make sure that we're educating people as much as we can and assisting our local governments and going to church and going to community meetings and getting on Zoom and what have you to let people know that they can vote wherever they want to on election day. We're going to have an extra week to vote early this time around.
Okay.
But people really do need to know everything that has taken place, so when they get to the voting booth, we won't have to worry about longer lines and people being confused because the state purposely wanted them to be so.
Right. And so you brought up a great point, which is how can we get young people energized to say, hey, I'm going to work the polls this year because the person that normally works it is an elderly person and my body is more geared to take on the coronavirus if it comes my way? Or how can we get more young people, especially say in high school? There are a lot of them turning 18, maybe get with some of the school districts to get their kids signed up. And then how can we mobilize them to the polls? I know a lot of churches do souls to the polls, which they've tried to stop early voting on Sundays because so many people. But not only do we have to get them registered, but how can we get them registered and then mobilized to get them to the polls?
So I think it goes back to what Congressmember Vesey was talking about is its education. In the same way as we need to have this conversation about the census, I think that it's imperative to have the conversation about just the opportunities to go serve. A lot of high schools and even a majority of the colleges in Dallas have service learning opportunities where the students get credit or they get some type of volunteerism award in order to put on their college application. Just for volunteering. I think that this is a great opportunity to mobilize together and say, look, I work for a nonprofit. I will sign off on your volunteerism sheet if you agree to work the polls for this many hours. But I think that we just haven't asked them. Right. I think it's simple. I think that our young people are community centric. I think that they, even if they're not super passionate about politics or super passionate about, working the polls per se, I think that if we raise up the fact that one, you're protecting an elderly person that you love. 2, we're working together to change this election, right? To change this current state of affairs. And 3, this is a great opportunity for you to get involved, for you to serve your community and to get some volunteerism hours. They do worse stuff to volunteer. All you got to do is sit there and hand people ballots and check their names off. That's easy work. So I think that we just need to ask. And I think that we'd be surprised at how many people would stand up.
Yes. I see a comment here from Caitlin Glover. As a young adult, we stayed lined up for Black Friday and movie game night releases, etc. Why can't we stay lined up to vote? How can I show the importance to my peers and those eligible to vote and be effective while doing it? That's a great point. I mean, there's so many people that I know who've camped out on a Black Friday or stayed for some Jordans or something like that. People stay in line and do things that they find is important to them. And this is important to you, right? You want to go back to school? You want your life to be normal? Are you upset that you lost your job? Are you tired of this unrest, people in the streets protesting? Are you tired? If you're tired, then stand in line. That's how I feel, And then there's a lot of people who are felons who are eligible to vote but don't know anything about that if they're not on papers. So we have to change the narrative in our communities. And I think once we change the narrative and start educating and letting them know how important it is, then we'll get more people turning out the vote. Pastor Haynes, do you want to add anything in regards to souls to the polls and what your church is doing to get more people registered to vote and then actually to the polls?
Okay, yeah, I do. So on one level, I'll simply say what we're looking at doing at Friendship West is a few things. Number one, increasing registration among high school and college students, and so that's going to be our thrust between August and the end of September, the first part of October. We also are connecting with nursing home facilities to make sure that residents know their status and they can request a mail-in ballot. We're encouraging everyone to complete a voter registration card, check your voter status, and pull up at the polls. Do all of that. And Jazz, I got to go back to this. Please forgive me.
No
This
time.
is so important, okay? People talk about being woke. As far as I'm concerned, if you're woke, it's not only what you do in the streets on the pavement, it's also what you do about getting to the polls. And further, it's about what you do as it relates to changing policy. Here's what got me. We talked about the long lines, and I love the question about staying in lines for Black Friday, etc. Here's the deal. If we take our wokeness from the pavement to the polls to then changing public policy, Congressman BC is on to something. We have a whack Secretary of State here in Texas who is a part of that conspiracy to suppress the vote. He's a part of that same mentality that was expressed by our lieutenant governor, who said, in the name of opening up the economy, and now Texas is a hotspot because of that kind of mentality. And he said, there are some things more important than living. When you get people like that out of office and then put in office and hold accountable those in office and then change policies, for example, why is it that in a so-called democracy, which the value of a democracy is what? One person, one vote. Why is it not that election day is not a national holiday so people don't have to take off from work to go and vote? It's because we don't have in office politicians who value the right to vote for everyone. But if we did that, then guess what? That would minimize long lines on election day. I'm not even done. Why is it in a democracy that we don't have, as soon as you turn 18, you automatically are registered to vote? Why do you have to jump through hoops to do that in a so-called democracy? It's because, again, we've got to take our wokeness from the pavement to the polls, and then from the polls to changing public policy. And those are the kinds of things. So yeah, we're going to do our part. We the Wild Wild West. We're going to get folk out to vote. We're going to do all of that stuff. But my thing is, beyond getting people to the polls to vote, let's change public policy after we change politicians. And one of the things we've got to change is act like America is a democracy and not an oligarchy, because right now it's an oligarchy for the up and in, suppressing the rights of those who don't have access to their opportunities. So y'all, here it is. If you so woke, show me you woke. Don't even mention the name John Lewis if you don't go to the polls and vote. And Congressman BC, I say to all of your colleagues, keep John Lewis's name out of your mouth if you are not going to push for the passage of the full voting rights bill. Keep his name out of your mouth, because if this is a democracy, it's one person, one vote, then make it easier for us to vote as opposed to trying to keep us from voting.
Yeah.
That's right. You want to add to that?
We want to, and we passed it in the House. We want to hear from John Cornyn. What does he have to say? He's up in 2020. Let's hear what he has to say on this.
I agree. I definitely agree. In regards,
Jazzy, can I say this real quick?
Yes.
One of the ways that our young people can help, and let me give our young people credit, because they have done a tremendous job raising American consciousness when it comes to police brutality, racism, and other things that we're trying to overcome on their Instagram, on their Twitter. We have 100 days left. How about for these next 100 days, the same way how we did blackout, these next 100 days, focus on voting. Use your social media and your platform to remind your friends over and over again that we need to make sure that we are registered and that we know all the rules, and that we go and vote in November.
Absolutely. They definitely need to know what to go and vote in November. Can you explain to the listeners out there what's on the line? Now, they know that they're going to vote for the president, right? But what other items or people are on the ballot in November? Because those elections and those places mean a lot too. Like if it's judges, the railroad commissioner, all of those. What else can people expect to see on the ballot?
Yeah, no,
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Jazzy.
Obviously, besides the presidency, we have U.S. Senate race, and we need for people to vote in that U.S. Senate race. Again, ask John Cornyn where he stands on Mitch McConnell bringing the voting rights bill to the Senate floor so it can get passed and go to Trump's desk. In addition to that, we do have railroad commissioner. That's another way how they try to trick us, because the railroad commission has nothing to do whatsoever with the railroads. It's what regulates oil and gas in the state of Texas, which is 9% of our state's GDP. And we need to make sure that we vote in the railroad commission race. We have state legislative races. Again, I know that you have to be nonpartisan on your show, Jazzy. I'm a Democrat. Democrats need 9 seats to win back a majority in the state legislature. The state legislature is not only going to redraw their lines after we get census numbers, they're going to redraw the U.S. congressional lines that myself, Colin Aldrich, and Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson represents. So if we have a majority there, I can guarantee you that the lines would look a lot different the way a Democratic majority would draw them in relation, especially to the 3 African-American members of Congress, including myself, that we have in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, if opposed to the way how if the Republicans drew them. And so, yes, we need to make sure that we vote in these other races. And again, there will be no straight ticket voting. You have to take the time to go down ballot and make sure that you are voting for people that are going to put our community first.
All right, Councilman Casey Thomas, you want to add to that? I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Unmute yourself.
He's muted.
Okay. You muted yourself again. Okay. He's working on it. Pastor Hayes, you want to add to that when he fixes that?
Well, I just say this. I love Congressman VC's suggestion, and that is we've had a blackout day on social media. We need to have a Black In Day on social media, and that is basically, I would say, Jazz, it'd be a powerful thing if we link up, partner up, and say every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we basically blow up the internet with issues and where people stand right here in this state on certain issues. Okay, so this is John Cornyn's record on this. This is so-and-so's record on this. And every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we just basically blow up the 97.9 and 94.5 community and say, this is what we're going to do, and start a movement that hits across the whole country where we are educating ourselves. Because one of the things I came across this sign when I was in Ghana last year during the 400 celebration, and it said, bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. And good people often don't vote because they don't know what the issues are. So let's have a Black In Day and educate ourselves at least 3 days a week. We can call it the Mark VC Black In Day. This is your idea, and make this thing happen.
I love it. I love it. We're gonna have to work something out, because I'll get it together. So that's a great idea. Councilman Thomas, are you back with us?
Hey, Jazz, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so that, something that's really critical is in Texas, we're only 9 seats away, and I know Congressman Veazey knows about this, from a change in the state house. So it's very, very important, because that's how they determine who the Speaker of the House is going to be. Redistricting is coming up. So it's critically important individuals who live in some of those close and challenging House districts, we need to make sure people know what's at stake with that. Because if that happens, then there's going to be a possibility for real change that hasn't happened in Texas in a very long time. And so voter education is critically important. That's the one component that we don't do as well, is voter education. That's what Pastor Haynes was talking about, Councilman Veazey. We've got to make sure people know not only what's on the ballot, what's at stake. We got to get sample ballots. We got to make sure that the state on your website, you have a sample ballot. That way people can see exactly what's going to be on the ballot. They know before they go in to vote exactly what's at stake. And with the elimination of straight ticket voting, you know, from the top to the bottom, we got to come up with something catchy. Pastor Haynes probably come up with something for us. From the top to the bottom, people have to vote, because if we lose any votes, people may vote president and then that's it. Then we jeopardize all the other things that we could have and all the change that could happen in Texas. And the main thing to think about is the governor's race. In 2 years, the governor is up for re-election again. And his report card, based on COVID, based on social injustice, right now he's getting an F, a flat out F. And he needs to be judged based upon his performance, just like we all are.
Absolutely. Michelle, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what Pastor Haynes said was, and what Councilmember Thomas said also was wildly important. I think that we often say, go vote, go to the polls, you need to vote, but we don't actually educate people on what people's scorecards are, what their records are. And so there are resources in Dallas where you can get some of that information, but I don't think that we do a good job of lifting it up. We just tell people to go to the polls and vote, right? And so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to a couple of organizations that I know and love, that I know do a great job. But I also love this idea. Let me know how I can do the Black End Day and support it with some of these organizations. But Dallas Weekly, which is a local Black publication, does Monday Night Politics, which is an excellent way to ask questions to specifically to local politicians. They do try to bring in some state politicians to just ask like where they stand. The community gets to ask these questions. I'm a lover of Monday Night Politics. BYP 100, follow them on Instagram, the Black Youth Project 100. It is a bunch of Gen Zs and millennials that you've seen doing a lot of the protesting. They're also lifting up some of these issues. The Dallas-Fort Worth Urban League Young Professionals have a voter hub on their website. They do a great job of bringing in people, educating their group about around like who's running for what and what information that you can gather. The National Urban League Young Professionals, the NAACP. So there's a lot of organizations that are giving information about where people stand, what their records are, how they voted in the past, which is important for us to know. And so I don't want people just to go vote. I want us to be intentional about getting the information out about where people stand and who you should vote for. Because, you know, as my granny used to say, all of our skin folk ain't kin folk. And there are people that, you know, sound good a little bit on paper that we just need to vote out. They don't need to be there anymore. And so I just want to thank Pastor Haynes for bringing that up, because it's wildly important. We can't just say go vote without giving people information of who they should vote for.
Absolutely. Because that's what I hear is, well, who did you vote for? And then you have to kind of explain, well, this is my choice, but you can make your own choice, right? And so the voter education piece is something that we're going to have to sit down, like Pastor Haynes mentioned, that, you know what, maybe it's time to break this down and make it a little bit smaller to smaller pieces and just focus on Senate only, right? And then maybe the next week we focus on House races only or Railroad Commissioner only. We'll have to break this thing down so people can make their own informed, educated decision come November. So that is a great topic. Now, I know we're getting toward the end of our conversation. It's been such a wonderful conversation, but I cannot let you guys leave without getting your thoughts about the kids going back to school in the fall. I know that Congressman Mark Veazey has a young son. I know Councilman Casey Thomas has a young son. And Michelle, I'm not sure if you have any children, and Pastor Haynes, but I know your daughter's grown. Your daughter's grown. She ain't in school. But, you know, so Michelle, I'll start with you. Do you have any young children?
So I have a son. He goes to Townview.
Okay.
And my son will not be returning to school in the fall. Not unless it's, it's mandated. And even then, we're going to figure out a way to keep him out. Luckily, he's in high school, so we can do things like dual credit and be a little unique about his schooling. But I think that the thing that we need to think about is that, the conversation that I'm hearing centered is that, children are less likely to get COVID and, like they're healthy and they're going to be. Who's teaching the children? Like the kids aren't going to school by themselves, right? Like who are the educators who are sitting with the children, who are loving on the children? And if you have ever been around a child, you know that you can't, first of all, you can't put a mask on them. They're not going to keep it on. Second of all, can you imagine how traumatizing it is for a kindergartner, right? First time in school. To walk into a school with complete strangers. They already break down every year, right? We already know. But they go into a school and everyone's face is covered.
Right.
How traumatizing is that for a child? Like, we're not thinking about, one, the health of our educators, the health of our administrators, the health of our children, but we're also not thinking about the social and emotional aspects that go into education that is going to traumatize these young children if you're exposing them to this space where they don't know if it's safe, they can't see the expression. Like it just doesn't make logical sense to me. I just don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they can't even play with their friends like they normally play with their friends. So that's another. Councilman Casey Thomas, you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I want to make this point, then I'll definitely answer the school question. We have over 1.4 million unregistered African Americans in the state of Texas. We have to make sure that we get registered, and that will change the turnout of the presidential and every other election here in Texas. But as far as schools, real simple. It's as long as many other groups are mean virtual, as long as the current resident, because I don't refer to him as the president, current resident of the White House's child's school is not going to be open, then our school shouldn't be open either. Our children are the best that we have to offer. And why would we put our children in a position that's unsafe and is as risky? And as was stated earlier, we have so many senior teachers. We have a lot of elderly teachers, people who are teaching who are at risk. We have a lot of teachers who are dealing with underlying health issues. They're at risk. And so the children not only are at risk, the teachers are at risk, and there are many, many things that need to be done. If we follow the CDC original guidelines, not the ones that were pressured for them to create, they have been the expert on public health illnesses for decades. We're not going to allow politics to determine what public health should make a determination of.
Congressman Mark Vesey.
Yeah, no, Jazzy, it's something that we're dealing with in our house. I mean, my 14-year-old back in March and April, he was like, yes, no school. When is it going to be official? When are they going to announce no school? And now you know what he says? He says, Daddy, am I going to be able to be around other human beings except you and Mama ever again?
Yes.
Because he's in 9th grade. He's going into high school, and he wants to be able to be with his boys, to be with his friends. Right. And I feel bad for him, which is one reason why we need to make sure that we are watching our children's mental health and our mental health, because being cut off like that, there are consequences of that. But we also know there are consequences of not taking this pandemic seriously, and sending our children back to school right now is just not an option. Fort Worth ISD, where my son is, they've already announced no in-person school until September 28th. And I can guarantee you, if you look at how this virus has been behaving and how rapidly that it spreads, and that, again, we haven't experienced flu or allergy season yet with this virus, that there's no way that school is going to even be in person in the ever probably this year. They're just putting that date out there just so they have a placement. But we know what's happening out there, and we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and our families first.
Pastor Haynes.
And let me just say this. one of the things that's been very interesting is that you have a lot of people in power who are making decisions about kids going back to schools that their kids will never attend, which is why, again, when you talk about the importance of voting, when you vote, for example, for the presidency, you're also voting for someone to lead what? The Department of Education. And right now we have someone leading the Department of Education who is an enemy to public education.
Right.
And so all of those persons in that particular administration are pushing to get kids back in school. Ask them, how many of your kids attend public schools? And the answer is they don't. And since they don't, my thing is, and I've told my members, I want you to take your signals from what Betsy DeVos does as it relates to where she sends her kids. If her kids, and we know she's too old for that, but if her kids were going to, I don't mean to be ageist, because my daughter is Howard grad, okay? But I am talking about the reality that, you know, a lot of them are making decisions about going to schools that their kids will not go to. You can't do that. And so on one level, I'm pleading for us to connect the dots here between our vote and those who make decisions that we have to live with the consequences of. And I'm also saying, and Congressman VC, thank you so much. There's no way we should be even thinking about using our kids as guinea pigs, because don't forget, they're still calling this a novel virus, which means it's unpredictable. And even though it has not hit kids yet, it does not mean that given certain circumstances, it will not hit kids en masse. And so my thing is, we ain't gonna allow our kids to be guinea pigs that go into our schools and end up getting sick, and we lose them because you got politicians who could care less about our future anyway.
Well, you know what? We are actually going to have a town hall coming up in August where we just focus on this issue only, because we have a lot of teachers who are talking about this. We have parents. They're talking about the mental health of kids. It's you know, if they're not going to school, it's worse, you know. And it's like you can't even work on mental health if you're not alive. And what they don't talk about is a lot of these young kids that live in our neighborhoods, they're being raised by their grandparents. And so, or their grandparents are very active in their lives. Grandparents are sticking in. So you have a young 10-year-old who's been raised by their 60, 70-year-old grandparent, and they're going to come home and get their grandparents sick. And so these are things that we're not really fully thinking out. And in addition to the teachers. And so this is another conversation that we're definitely going to have. And I'm glad that everybody is all on the same page. And that's why it's so important that we get everybody out to vote. I just thank everybody so much for joining us today. I know we've been on here an hour. We got people over here making their comments, and I thank you. You can continue to make your comments, and we'll go through and read the comments and respond. But again, this is a very important conversation, and I just want to thank all of our guests. Did anybody want to leave any parting words before we end our discussion for this evening?
Well, you know me.
Go ahead.
I really appreciate the insights of this amazing panel. I'm honored to have been a part of it with you. Jazzy J, you are in the community, about the community, and we love and respect you and thank God for you. I simply wrap it with this, and that is it. This conversation has taught me afresh how important it is for us to educate ourselves about this process. One of the things that was not said, it was mentioned about Harris County. I'll say it about Dallas County. In Dallas County, because all politics is local, I'm glad that, and thank you, Casey Thomas, and all of our elected officials locally, because in Dallas County, you can vote, watch this, wherever. You can literally vote wherever. We've got to get that word out. Why is that important? Because I have members who live in Denton County and in Collin County, and they tell me that every single election, their voting location has been moved around. and they literally go around trying to find their voting location. And again, you know who they look, you know what they look like. And so it's very important that you vote down ballot. Thank you for that reminder earlier. You got to vote down ballot because you got people down ballot who are making decisions where it's more difficult for you to vote. And so please, I wrap it with what T.I. said again, your vote is your mic. You can't rock a mic if it's been taken from you. You can't rock a mic if you leave it at home. So please, you've got a song to sing, you've got a rap to get out, but you got to have your mic. And the good news is we've got a mic, and the mic is our vote. And in honor of the late, great John Lewis, all of us need to rock our mic this November.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Jazzy, thank you very much for putting this together. A great panel. And want to reiterate what Pastor Haynes just talked about, the importance of making sure that we are rocking our mic and that we're going to vote and that we use our social media. You know, we have Black In Friday or Black In Weekday, whatever we name it. We need to make sure that we use it because the young people in this country, they have the power to change things. Look at what they've exposed on Twitter. Look at some of the things, how they've used it to be able to bring about meaningful change and votes in the United States Congress. I mean, the young people in this country, they have power with their social media. Let's use it to remind people for these next 100 days that this election is the most important of their lifetimes and all of our lifetimes.
I agree. Anyone else? Casey, Michelle?
Yeah. So again,
Yeah,
Jazzy,
Jazzy, I'll go.
On this panel with these really brilliant brothers here. The only encouragement that I would say is, you know, for those of you who are tuned in today, make sure that you are using social media to follow people that have information for you. So go follow BYP100, go follow DFW ULYP, go follow the League of Women Voters, follow these people that have information for you, because there are already resources that are truncating the information or making it bite-sized so that way you can understand it and learn it. So be intentional. If you follow World Star Hip Hop, you can follow BYP100. That's it. Thank you so much.
That's right. Go ahead, Councilman Casey Thomas.
Yeah, thank you once again, Jazzy, for always being in the community, always wanting to keep the community informed. This election, as we've said, is the most important election of our lifetime. We must make sure not only that we stand up, we speak up, but we speak with our voice. Our vote is our voice. That's how we let people know that we are not going to tolerate status quo anymore. Time is out. That's been said sometimes. We've had a knee on our neck for over 401 years. Time is out now. It's time for us to stand up, speak up, and it's time for us to hold individuals accountable for doing what should have been done for America to fulfill the promise that it made to us many years ago.
Yes, thank you so much. And before we go, I do want everyone to know that there is a voter registration drive coming up, and it's going to be at DeSoto High School, 600 Eagle Drive, and that's going to be on Saturday, August 15th. From 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. So if you are not registered to vote or you have a question about getting registered to vote, please come out, drag your nieces and nephews, 18, 17, however, if they are going to be eligible to vote by November, get them registered, okay? And that information will be on our website at thebeat.dfw.com. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we will let you guys know when we do the next town hall. And again, it's going to focus on the kids going back to school. We want to hear the parents. We want to have a mental health expert. We want to have, you know, everyone from education to come on and talk to you guys and explain what option is the best option to have. So we will do that in August. So make sure you guys follow us on our Instagram pages and our Facebook pages for more information on that. So thank you guys again so much, and you have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.